This video was brought to you by Square Enix. So a little over a year ago, I was in the middle of my Twitch hiatus, and there's a lot of reasons for why I took that hiatus, but one of them was that I wanted to focus on producing content on YouTube again because I took a lot of pride in the content I produced here. So I decided to sit down and start working on rebranding and upgrading production on the production side, and while I was at that, I decided to tackle my insane backlog of games. And one of the first games I played was Octopath Traveler, the breakout hit from Square Enix, whose art style inspired the HD 2D genre of pixel art games, where they stick 2D sprites against 3D backgrounds with high quality special effects. But thanks to this game's success, we started seeing other games come out like Triangle Strategy, the Live Alive remake, and they even announced a remake of Dragon Quest III in this game's style, which they still don't have a release date for, and I'm kind of salty about that. But fans of the first Octopath were a little worried that Square Enix might have been moving on from it as a series, so we were all collectively happy when they announced Octopath Traveler 2, a game that, much like its grandfather series, is a sequel that features a new cast of characters in a new setting. So, to answer the question that people ask a million times online when it comes to situations like this, no, you do not need to play the first game to play this game. But I still think you should, because it's really good. Octopath Traveler 2 reveled in the fact that people pretty much already knew what to expect when it came to gameplay, so most of the marketing for the sequel was focused on the new cast, all 8 of which I'll be sure to touch on in today's video. But in the week leading up to the release of the game, I already had my Switch copy pre-ordered when Square Enix decided to give me a review copy of the game for PlayStation 5, which is the version I'm going to be using as the basis for today's video. But since I have both versions, I guess I can, use it as a little bit of a comparison, and it recently just dropped on Xbox, so what better time to bring this up again, because I decided that I wanted to sit here and, big up this game because not only is Square Enix one of my white whale gaming companies, it also just kind of bothered me that Octopath Traveler 2 wasn't featured in the Game Awards last year. So, without further ado, today I bring you a review of the best RPG you didn't see at the Game Awards last year, Octopath Traveler 2.
Hey, yo, Giant, let's go!
In this new setting, we follow our 8 new travelers on their adventures, and I think I want to talk about them in the order that I encountered them. Just like the first game, you picked one character to start with, and then you recruit the rest as you travel, so in my case, here is how these tales began. I'm sure it'll be the same for everybody else, it all depends on how you choose to start. And before I actually start detailing some of these beginning stories, I want to give a spoiler warning because not only is it more than the marketing was showing to talk about some of these first chapters for these characters, but just in the sense that, people don't want to know too much before they actually, see if a game is good or not. So, skip to this time mark if you don't want to hear about the stories and just hear about how it plays and whatnot. But I'm going to get into it. I started off as Oswald V. Vanstein, a scholar who'd been researching what is known as the one true magic with his partner Harvey. But just as he seemed to draw closer to an answer, Harvey used the magic he was developing to burn down his home, murdering Oswald's wife and child in the process. Oswald, being accused of the crime, was sentenced to life in prison on Frigid Isle. Oswald swore to get revenge on Harvey and endured imprisonment and harsh treatment, all in the name of vengeance, as this became his new and only goal in life. 5 years later, we catch up with Oswald meticulously planning a jailbreak with the help of another inmate named Emerald. They succeeded, but soon came to an impasse over how they would make it to the mainland, being a 4-day journey away on boat in freezing climates. After they separate, Emerald almost immediately ends up in a tight spot on a prison ship and resolves to sacrifice himself by setting fire to the boat, giving Oswald the cover he needed to get away completely. After washing ashore at a coastal village days later, Oswald is given care and clothing before setting out to find the man that took everything from him. Not long after the harrowing escape, I met the cleric Temenos Mistral, an inquisitor of the Church of the Flame, who has a bit of a playfully devious side and shows no qualms about questioning even the gods he serves when he deems it necessary. So much so that when he and a sanctum knight named Crick he only just met go to meet with the church's pontiff and discover that he had been murdered by a raging animal, he manages to deduce that it was no accident. Someone orchestrated the pontiff's demise, and Temenos makes it his business to find out who and why. After parting ways with Crick and joining the party, I picked up our thief, Throne Anguis. We find Throne's story beginning in the city of New Delsta at the end of a botched job that left one of her teammates dead. After escaping, we catch a glimpse of this terrible life that she lives under Mother and Father, the leaders of her thieves guild, the Blacksnakes. Even being known as the best in the nest, she's subjugated to regular abuse and an absence of free will, being fitted with a kind of slave collar that would inject her with a lethal dose of poison should she try to remove it. When she is sent to murder Scarachi, her teammate and the apparent traitor that sabotaged her previous job, she finds him murdered by her other remaining partner Piero, who reveals that Father had ordered them all to kill each other in a bid to see who would succeed Mother and Father to lead the Blacksnakes. With this revelation driving Piero to fight Throne and therefore his demise, Throne resolves to end Mother and Father to earn her freedom and leave the Blacksnakes behind her. After sailing to some islands in the south, I found Ochet, a young hunter from Totohaha who had been trained by her master Juva from a young age and given one of two companion animals that you choose yourself, either a fox named Akala or an owl named Mahina. This is all in preparation for some disaster that was said to strike one day. She lived her daily life hunting and protecting her fellow beastling people from humans in a nearby settlement from conflicts that often broke out over territories. On one such day, she offers to save a human child that went missing in order to alleviate tensions between the two groups, but when all seemed well, the prophesied disaster seems to be coming true when her village was attacked by strange creatures while she was out. After arriving just in time to save Master Juva from certain death and defeating the incoming threats, Master Juva beckons for her to travel the world and gather these three mystical animals said to be the key to fighting off the coming calamity. After she joined up, I sailed west and found an apothecary named Casti Florens at the town of Cannelbrine, an amnesiac who can only recall her occupational skills, and the only clues to her past being the name etched on her uniform and the reputation that comes with said uniform. After meeting a fellow apothecary named Malaya and setting out to aid the town from an apparent outbreak, Malaya offers her a nugget of information about the group she's supposedly a part of, known as Heirs Apothecaries. They are widely known, but not for good reasons, being said to claim to aid others only to end up poisoning them instead. With this info giving her a feeling of unease but also compelling her to learn more about them, she sets out to find them in hopes of finding the truth not only about the group, but of herself. After traveling further west, I found the exiled warrior prince of Ku, Hikari. Though he's a fierce warrior, aiding and helping his country win many a battle that solidified it as a military power, he's a gentle spirit that wishes not to shed blood needlessly and seeks peace for everyone, at the great annoyance of many around him, such as his half-brother General Mugen. Be that as it may, Hikari was favored by many more, including the vast population of Ku. And 3 years after the battle that earned Ku their reputation, many of Hikari's teammates went their separate ways, and Hikari was made to live amongst the common folk. Eventually though, their father the king announces to Hikari that he planned to make his younger child the successor to the throne, in order to lead Ku to an age of peace. Wanting the glory of the throne for himself, Mugen stages a coup to take over Ku. That's not confusing said out loud at all, and kills the king. With his dying words, the king says that Hikari must live for the sake of Ku, and Hikari vows to return and wrest control of the country from Mugen's hands before barely managing an escape, and he sets out to recruit his former comrades in order to prepare to reclaim the kingdom that's rightfully his for the sake of peace. Not long afterwards, I found the merchant Partitio Yellowwill in the western settlement of Oarsrush. We see that Partitio's father Pap and his business partner Rock Brilliant founded Oarsrush as a mining settlement to harvest the area's abundance of silver. Over the last 16 years of his life, Partitio learned the tricks of the trade from Pap and showed huge potential. But that was all overshadowed by Rock leaving one day claiming that their time of success was borrowed. He tries to recruit Partitio only to be turned down respectfully as Partitio sees the settlement, Pap included, as his whole life. Somewhere along the line, the deeds of the land had been reclaimed by the landlord that originally sold it to Pap because of some shady fine print. And through the landlord's greed, Oarsrush had been taxed into poverty, to the point that people were fighting over scraps of bread. And Partitio looks after his father, whose health has been declining. Quick side note, shout out to whoever on the writing team decided to add in that conversation with Partitio and Pap about the bell peppers and beef. I see you. I'm also a Cowboy Bebop fan. I appreciate the reference. Anyway, it gets to a point that Partitio has had enough and storms the house of Gif, a scummy bandit who works for the landlord, and finds out that this shadowy landlord was none other than Pap's old business partner, Rock Brilliant. Particio gets back the deed to Orzrush, saving the village, but Pap tells Particio that he doesn't need to look after them anymore, and that he should see the world. Armed with his talent as a merchant, his desire to talk to Mr. Rock to learn why he did what he did, Pap's hat, and his wits, Particio sets out to see the world. Having lived a life both prosperous and poor in equal measure, he vows to one day rid that devil-called poverty from the world and sets out. Soon after, I met our last traveler, the dancer Agnia Bristarni. She grew up in a small country town called Cropdale in the Leaflands as the daughter of a tailor and a dancer who was a star in the wider world. Her dream is to follow in her mother's footsteps and become a star all her own. In search of this dream, Agnia saves up enough money to strike out on her own. Everyone seems to support her dream except for her father, who seems cold and strict. But one day, after a giant boar attacks her village and she manages to pacify it, her father gives her a dress that used to belong to her mother, retailored to fit her. He then gives Agnia his blessing and the village sees her off. With the village's support and her will to guide her, Agnia sets out to become a star, just like her mother before her. Once I gathered all 6 travelers and saw their stories, I was genuinely convinced that this is a much stronger cast than the first Octopath. I gravitated to most of this cast, whereas I felt the first only had 3, maybe 4 that hooked me. As I traveled the world and experienced each character's story chapter by chapter, I was engrossed the whole way and looked forward to each development. The story of multiple characters even split off into different routes with different level requirements that encourage engaging with the game even more than what I already felt was necessary. I want to break down each story more, but as you can see, there's a whole lot to cover, and I only detailed each character's first chapter, except for Oswald, because in an interesting move, you had to play his first 2 chapters in order to gain access to the wider map. I also love how in this game, you don't just see the travelers standing around waiting for you to pick them up. They're actively engaged in the setting as you encounter them. Casty, for one, is found carrying a sick man on the pier as you arrive in Candlebrine, and Hikari is seen fighting off assailants when you meet him. I love these little touches that paint the world as more alive than the first game, but there's more to it than the writing alone. But we'll touch more on this after I talk about the method by which you experience what the game offers. Admittedly, this is the part of the game that feels the most samey to the original in my opinion, although I don't think that's a bad thing. Nor do I think it's all one-to-one. You're still doing turn-based battles where you exploit weaknesses to break shields and earn free turns while dropping boost points to buff attacks so you can decimate your foes. And it's all still fun, make no mistake about that. Although some may make the case that this is more of the same, and to an extent I would agree. However, I appreciate the methods by which Acquire has iterated on this game's formula. There's a ton of small changes that you may miss, like how the Scholar spells, when boosted, are no longer multi-hitters but one big boosted attack. Or how the Apothecary has more skills centered on debuffing enemies, so I think there's enough of a fundamental change that it forces you to reacclimate and adjust in ways that, if you're watching closely, add an extra layer so as not to drag early on. Another thing that was added in are latent abilities. It's a sort of limit break-esque mechanic where, as you fill this meter on each character, they're granted a one-off bonus effect in battle that really switches up the way you think about your attack strategies and party composition. Some examples of this are how Oswald can change his spells from multi-targeting ones to one that does increase damage to a single foe for the same cost. Or how Temenos can use his latent ability to damage an enemy's shield points regardless of their weaknesses. All the way to how Hikari and Ochette can gain access to an exclusive suite of finishing attacks, and Casty using hers to negate material costs for her concoctions. All of these add layers of depth to the combat that would be great in do-or-die situations, so some of those bosses in big group fights can be just that more manageable. Speaking of managing, the job system makes a triumphant return, and again, it is iterated upon in a way that not only encourages exploration, but experimentation and indulging in side quests. See, in the original, you had to find these hidden shrines that granted you the sub-jobs that you could give to other characters. The shrines are still there, but instead of giving you the job, they give you rare skills for the main user of that job. And now you earn those sub-jobs by finding guilds in the open world that bestow the job upon you. Not only is this great in a world-building sense where you can see places that has these occupations thriving, but it serves as another excuse to explore the towns you visit, as well as thoroughly checking paths between settlements. What's more, you can complete a series of quests for each guild that grant additional licenses, which allows you to equip multiple people at the same time with that job, so that you don't feel too pressured to miss out on experimenting with characters at any time. Side note, I think it's funny that everyone's battle outfits change with the job, but outside of battle they go back to their default outfits. I gave Particio the inventor job, and he goes from Pap's fedora to a top hat and back again. Truly a man of style and class. A lot of this is also dictated by how much you're willing to engage with the options presented. As I mentioned before, the general stories of each character are presented on the map as usual, but what you'll find is that some characters are given multiple parts to some chapters, and the level requirements can vary wildly, with chapters as early on as the second for some characters having one part that'll require something like level 16 and another requiring you to be in your 30s. I'll admit that it can feel a little padded sometimes, emphasizing the feeling that you're not progressing with certain characters as much as you'd like, but I think this also encourages mixing your parties more, since you'll clearly be needing to keep up with multiple characters in order to see meaningful story progression. There's also some highlighted side quests, like the Scent of Commerce quest from Partitio, where you'll do things like paying 100,000 leaves to an apprentice shipwright to get yourself a boat that will allow you to travel the open seas, an option that was never given to you in the first game. While this essentially is just another flavor of standard exploration, the reality is that the seas themselves are home to some pretty strong enemies for mid-game training, and through sailing you'll make port at some very high-level late-game areas, so as long as you're willing to look, who knows how many secrets are there for you. I personally like the mystery and the air of danger, but it is very optional because once you take enough ferries and travel the map, you'll be able to fast travel anywhere. So if sailing the open seas isn't your thing, again, it's all up to you and how much you're willing to invest, figuratively and painfully to my pockets, literally. The place in which I was the most invested, however, was in the presentation, and how this iteration of Octopath fully immersed me in its world. I don't need to speak too much to the HD 2D style, we're all aware of what we're looking at this point. But I feel that every character is much more expressive, even enemies. I mean, in the first game they all generally had an idle animation and just flashed when they attacked, but here, they have actual attack animations, even for small time enemies. That makes the action feel more like, action. Considering how much more I find myself grinding in this game, it helps keep me interested in what's going on. More than that though, I feel like there was more emphasis placed on character acting in this game's pixel animations. Every character has their own little quirks, like how Partitio holds his hat when he runs and Hikari keeps his hand on his blade for his run animation. And although she's probably my least favorite character, Agnia is clearly a better dancer than Primrose from the first Octopath. Animations aside, much more of this game is voiced, so gone are the days where a particularly smarmy line from Cyrus in the first game was paired with a random insert of him laughing. Instead, we have fully voiced cutscenes through and through. The range of these performances honestly blows me away too. The voice actors dropped strong performances across the board. There's a loss-fueled anger that drives Alejandro Saab's performance as Oswald, making his stern and often curt delivery serve double time as a shield for the pain he hides in his heart.
Harvey. The man who took everything from me.
Jazz Patrick's Partitio is full of boundless confidence and a kind of curiosity at times that you would expect from that country kid meets the city / bigger world vibe.
This doohickey won't sell? Seems interesting enough to fly off the shelves to me.
That goes for Xanth Hune's Agnia too. While she may not be one of my favorite characters personally, I appreciate her never-ending wonder at the world outside of her village, coupled with the way she's shown to practice her city talk to come off more appealing because she's embarrassed of her country accent. Jordan Dash Cruz as Temenos exudes a simultaneously coy, condescending, and caring nature which belies his dedication to his job, offset by how little he seems to actually care about coming off as pious, such as when he finishes a battle by saying, "May the sacred flame guide you," or something like that.
May the sacred flame guide you, or something like that.
I love that bit. Temenos is kind of my spirit animal in this game. Howard Wang is dope as Hikari too. He's basically this game's version of Kenshin with a sprinkle of the reluctant ruler trope while also being steadfast and willing to do what he must for the people he's fated to lead. Susie Young as Ochette has a playful innocence, or ignorance depending on how you see it, mixed with compassion for everyone around her, be it man or beast. Standing side by side with Sarah Winehaft, bringing her own helping of compassionate mixed with this mysterious air to her speech as she puts the pieces of her memory back together in her performance as Casti. And last but not least, we have Erica Mendez as Throne, showing off that tried and true cold demeanor that hides a deep emotional complexity that I'm still trying to unravel. I could go on, but I don't dislike a single performance in this game. Also, DC Douglas brings that Resident Evil 5 Wesker energy and totally hams it up as Father. I appreciate them all for different things, I've also been noting that while the first game was full of things and people to interact with, there's so much more to this game that makes me pay attention to a lot of background elements. And when I say background elements, I don't just mean the literal backgrounds. I mentioned before how you find guilds that specialize in certain jobs, giving me the impression that the towns are full of their own communities and professions outside of the random passerby NPCs that you use your path actions on. Which makes me realize that I forgot to mention this game features day and night cycles where time passes naturally, but you can also switch it up with the press of a button. And when you do, you see the entire atmosphere change, with people coming and going depending on the time of day. The music even changes to more subdued, soft versions of the soundtrack that gives off the vibe that the world and everything in it slows down at night. Heck, you can even do it during the title screen to get an entirely new version of the theme song. And when you interact with the NPCs that are around at night, you find that all of your party members even have new path actions at night, which thematically all seem like things they wouldn't do in broad daylight, like Throne knocking people out cold or Oswald mugging people? Sheesh, I guess prison really does change people. But even more than this, the environments just seem so much more active. I can't count the number of times I low-key drifted off in cutscenes and caught myself thinking, wow, look at all the bushes and trees moving, or the times I was walking down a path and said, oh man, look at those birds, they're just sitting there, doing bird stuff. And don't even get me started on the set pieces in Hikari's story where you see background characters battling all over the place, even within battles. At times I completely forgot that I was playing something that was supposed to be retro inspired because there's a level of polish to this game that, I gotta be honest, I can't recall the last time I saw a AAA game that paid this much attention to detail instead of making some generically realistic experience that isn't worth the $70 they expect you to pay these days. And it looks so good no matter which version you're playing, because I primarily played the PS5 copy given to me by Square Enix, but I was also playing it on my Switch when I was out and about, and the game is just as enjoyable on each version. The 60 FPS on the PS5 version is super slick, but the Switch version is still perfectly fine to me running at 30 FPS. I would note that no matter which version I played, I got some quick frame rate dips when casting big spells during large battles or when running through dense environments like forests or in New Delsta. Not a deal breaker though, they come and go so fast you might not even catch it. But aside from all that, I think my favorite thing about this game is how much more your party members interact with each other. In the first game, all you got was travel banter, which is this series' version of skits from the Tales of games. Those are nice, but outside of that, the first game lacked an organic synergy between your characters because it felt like, outside of small talk, these characters were so disconnected from one another. Not so in Octopath 2. They still have travel banter, but the game also features crossed path stories where two diametrically opposed characters encounter certain scenarios together and deal with them as a team, dialoguing and learning from one another. They unlock as you progress character stories symmetrically, and they serve as nice little side quests that offer up some entertaining interactions between your party. There's also banter in battle. Your characters will recognize strategic moves by other party members and shout them out for their effectiveness, playing into that whole team synergy thing I was just talking about. I really dig that because context-sensitive dialogue doesn't just stop at story-relevant fights and gives a bit of flavor to just about every fight. My team feels like a team, and I'm here for it. What I'm also here for is the soundtrack, because this OST is full of bangers. You get bigger, more epic themes when doing battles in high-level areas and such, which just feels impactful when you think about how I've been playing this game for upwards of 90 hours, and I can still fight things that force me to do a little grinding here and there. I appreciate them keeping it fresh, but all the characters have strong themes too. Oswald's, for one, conveys his pain and anger while giving you a hint at some emotion buried beneath it all. Ochet's is wild and energetic while containing an epic swell of instrumentation. And while those are all well and good, let me just say that whatever they're paying Yasunori Nishiki and the rest of the sound team for their composing skills, it probably ain't enough because hot damn that sax in Partitio's theme! I could very well go on, but to sum it all up, Octopath Traveler 2 is a shining example of how you do a sequel. They didn't need to reinvent the wheel on gameplay, even though they did tweak it a little bit. Instead, they provided a masterclass on iteration that makes the entire experience feel more substantial as a whole. I can easily recommend the game to any JRPG fan looking for a stacked adventure. As I said, I spent over 90 hours on this game before I made this video, so it's safe to say that I was completely satisfied with the time spent. And in closing, I want to thank Square Enix one more time for providing me with a PS5 copy of the game, because they have been one of my white whale gaming companies to work with on my portfolio. So thank you for the opportunity. I was extremely honored, and I was already excited to play this game and spend money on it, which I did. So, take that for what it's worth. But while I'm at it, I also want to thank my patrons. And if you like what you saw, be sure to check out the One Sleepy Giant Patreon, where you can support works like these. And if you can't, I understand not everybody can support in that way. So if anything, be sure to like and subscribe to the video. I would appreciate that a lot. And also, you can follow me on Twitch. You can check me out over there for live Let's Plays and things of that nature, all the good stuff. But that's kind of where we end for today. So thank you for your time in watching this video. My name is Hector and I'm One Sleepy Giant. I had a lot of fun, but man, I need to take a big ol' nap before I decide to spend another almost 100 hours on another RPG. So let's pick this up later, okay? Take care, everybody.